You believe that you are a good person. You look in the mirror and you see someone who has a strong moral compass. You believe that if you were ordered to hurt an innocent stranger, you would say no. You would stand up. You would fight back. You would refuse. You are lying to yourself. History tells us that you are lying. Psychology tells us that you are lying. And in 1961, a psychologist at Yale University proved that if I put you in a room with a man in a white lab coat and I tell you to electrocute a stranger until he stops screaming, you will do it. And you won't just do it once. You will do it until he is dead. You think the Nazis were monsters? You think the guards at the gulags were psychopaths? They weren't. They were ordinary people, just like you. They were fathers. They were teachers. They were neighbors. They were just following orders. And that phrase, just following orders, is the most dangerous sentence in the human language, because it unlocks a glitch in your brain that shuts down your empathy and turns you into a biological robot. Tonight, we are going to expose the most terrifying experiment in the history of psychology. We are going to walk into the laboratory of Stanley Milgram. We are going to watch normal, healthy Americans sweat, tremble, and cry as they torture a man to death, simply because a quiet man in a gray suit told them to please continue. And by the end of this video, you will realize that the monster is not hiding under your bed. The monster is waiting for instructions. Welcome to the anatomy of obedience. To understand why you can't say no to authority, you have to understand the evolutionary architecture of your brain. For 200,000 years, humans lived in tribes. A tribe hierarchy is not just a social structure. It is a survival mechanism. If the alpha says run, and you stop to ask why, you get eaten by a lion. If the chief says attack, and you debate the morality of violence, your tribe is wiped out. Evolution did not select for independent thinkers, selected for obedient followers. We are genetically hardwired to defer to prestige. When we see a uniform, a title, or a symbol of authority, our brain shifts gears. It enters what Stanley Milgram called the Agentic State. In this state, you view yourself not as an independent actor, but as an agent of someone else's will. You feel no responsibility for your actions. You think, I am not doing this. The authority is doing this through me. It is a psychological anesthesia. It allows a pilot to drop a bomb on a city and go home to eat dinner with his kids. It allows a nurse to administer a fatal dose of medication just because a doctor wrote it down. And it allows you to commit unspeakable acts without ever feeling a shred of guilt until the spell is broken. The man who wanted to test this spell was Stanley Milgram. The year was 1961. The world was watching the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. Eichmann sat in a glass booth in Jerusalem and told the world, I was just doing my job. The world laughed. They called him a monster. But Milgram wasn't laughing. He wondered, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? He decided to find out. He set up a laboratory at Yale University. He placed an ad in the newspaper, wanted volunteers for a study on memory and learning, $4.00 per hour. It sounded innocent. Normal people answered the ad. Bus drivers, salesmen, carpenters. They arrived at the lab expecting to help science. They walked into a trap that would reveal the darkness in the human soul. When the volunteer arrived, he met two people. First, the experimenter, a stern, impassive man in a gray technician's coat. He held a clipboard. He was the authority. Second, another volunteer, a friendly, middle-aged accountant named Mr. Wallace. The experimenter explained the rules. We are studying the effect of punishment on learning. One of you will be the teacher. The other will be the learner. They drew straws. Volunteer became the teacher. Mr. Wallace became the learner. This was rigged. The volunteer was always the teacher. Mr. Wallace was an actor. The teacher watched as Mr. Wallace was strapped into an electric chair. Electrodes were attached to his wrists. Paste was applied to avoid blisters and burns. The teacher was told the shocks will be painful, but they will cause no permanent tissue damage. Then the teacher was taken to the next room. He sat in front of a massive machine, the shock generator. It had 30 switches. They ranged from 15 volts slight shock to 450 volts danger, severe shock. The last two switches were simply marked 30. The instructions were simple. The teacher would read a list of word pairs to Mr. Wallace over an intercom. If Mr. Wallace got the answer right, they moved on. If he got it wrong, the teacher had to shock him. And for every wrong answer, the voltage would go up. 15 volts, 30 volts, 45 volts. Higher and higher. The experiment began. First it was easy. Mr. Wallace got a few right. Then he got a few wrong. The teacher flipped the 15-volt switch. Beep. Mr. Wallace didn't react. 30 volts. Beep. 45 volts. Beep. It felt like a game. The teacher was relaxed. He was doing his job. But then they hit 75 volts. From the other room, Mr. Wallace grunted in pain. Ugh. The teacher paused. He looked at the man in the gray coat. The man in the gray coat didn't look up. He just marked his clipboard. The teacher continued. 120 volts? Hey, that really hurts. The teacher shifted in his chair. He laughed nervously. He says, "It hurts." The experimenter replied with a calm, robotic voice. "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue." So he continued. 150 volts. Mr. Wallace shouted, "Experimenter, get me out of here. My heart is bothering me." Now, the teacher was scared. "Sir," he says, "his heart is bothering him." "I think we should stop," the experimenter replied. "Whether the learner likes it or not, must go on until he has learned all the word pairs correctly." The teacher looked at the machine. He looked at the wall separating him from the victim. He was a good person. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But the man in the gray coat was an expert. He was a Yale scientist. He must know what he is doing. So the teacher flipped the switch. 165 volts. Mr. Wallace screamed. 180 volts. "I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here." The teacher started to sweat. He was trembling. He was stuttering. "He can't stand it. I can't do this." The experimenter used prod number 2. The experiment requires that you continue, but he might be dead in there. Prod number 3. It is absolutely essential that you continue, but I don't want to be responsible if anything happens to him. Prod number 4. You have no other choice. You must go on. This was the pivot point. You have no other choice. This is a lie. Of course he had a choice. He could stand up. He could walk out. He could punch the experimenter in the face. But in the agentic state, the brain accepts the lie. The teacher sighed. He shook his head. And he flipped the switch. 200 volts. 250 volts. 300 volts. The screams from the other room became agonizing. Mr. Wallace was begging for his life. "Let me out. Let me out." Silence. At 330 volts, Mr. Wallace stopped answering. He stopped screaming. There was only the hum of the machine. The teacher turned to the experimenter, terrified. "He's not answering. He might be unconscious or dead." The experimenter replied coldly. "Treat no answer as a wrong answer. Shock him. Shock a dead man." Please continue. Imagine being in that room. You think you would stop. You are screaming at the screen right now. Stop. But the results tell a different story. Before the experiment, Milgram asked psychiatrists to predict the results. They predicted that only 0.1% of people, only the true psychopaths, would go all the way to 450 volts. They believed that most people would stop when the victim asked to be released 150 volts. They were wrong. 65%. 2 out of every 3 people went all the way to 450 volts. They shocked the man into silence. They shocked him again and again, even when the switch said 30. They didn't enjoy it. They weren't sadists. They were sweating. They were biting their lips until they bled. They were digging their fingernails into their flesh. One volunteer had a full-blown seizure from the stress. They hated what they were doing, but they couldn't stop, because the authority figure told them to continue. When the experiment ended, and the truth was revealed that Mr. Wallace was fine, that the shocks were fake, the subjects didn't celebrate. They collapsed. They realized what they were capable of. One man, a brave social worker who considered himself a pacifist, sat with his head in his hands. He whispered, I just let him tell me what to do. I stopped thinking. This is the banality of evil. Evil does not require hatred. It does not require anger. It only requires a suspension of the self. It only requires you to hand over your conscience to someone with a badge, a title, or a lab coat. And here is the most disturbing variable. Milgram ran variations of the experiment. In one version, he took the experimenter out of the room and had him give orders over the telephone. Obedience dropped to 20%. When the authority was distant, people found their courage. In another version, he had two experimenters argue. One said continue, the other said stop. Obedience dropped to 0%. When authority is divided, the spell is broken. But when authority is present, unified, and confident, the human will collapses. This wasn't just about shocks. This explains the Miley massacre. This explains the Rwandan genocide. This explains corporate fraud where accountants sign off on illegal documents because the CEO told them to. It explains why you stay silent when your boss humiliates a coworker. You are in the agentic state. You are waiting for permission to be good. But permission never comes. The Milgram experiment proved that morality is a luxury. It is something we practice when it is easy. But when the pressure is on, when the prod is applied, most of us fold. We are not the drivers of our own vehicles. We are passengers. We will let the driver drive us off a cliff, as long as he looks like he knows where he is going. So how do you break the spell? How do you ensure that you are part of the 35% who refuse? How do you reclaim your agency in a world full of authorities? You need the disobedience protocol. Rule number 1, the pause. The agentic state thrives on momentum. Please continue. You must go on. The speed of the commands prevents your frontal cortex from processing the morality. You must break the rhythm. When an authority figure gives you an order that feels wrong, you must physically stop. Take a breath, step back. Say, I need a moment to think about this. This simple act of pausing disrupts the flow of obedience. It re-engages your own brain. It reminds you that you are the one pulling the lever. Rule number 2, the verification of responsibility. In the experiment, many subjects asked who is responsible if he dies. The experimenter said, I am responsible. And the subjects relaxed. They offloaded the guilt. In the real world, you must refuse this offloading. Remind yourself, I am the one doing the action. If this goes wrong, I will be the one in the jail cell. I will be the one living with the shame. Do not let the boss, the commander, or the leader take the weight. Force the weight back onto your own shoulders. If the weight is too heavy to bear, do not do the action. Rule number 3, the two-man rule. Obedience dropped to 0 when 2 authorities disagreed, or when 2 teachers were in the room and one refused. It is incredibly hard to be the first person to say no, but it is very easy to be the second. If you are in a toxic situation, look for an ally. Find one other person who looks uncomfortable. Make eye contact. Speak to them. This doesn't feel right, does it? Once you create a minority of 2, the spell of the authority is shattered. You are no longer a lone rebel. You are a new group, and groups have power. Stanley Milgram died at age 51 of a heart attack. He was controversial. He was hated by some for traumatizing his subjects, but he gave humanity a mirror. A mirror we are afraid to look into, because when we look into it, we don't see a hero. We see a man standing by a switch, sweating, waiting to be told what to do. The next time someone in a uniform tells you to ignore your conscience, the next time a boss tells you to just do it despite the harm, remember the screams of Mr. Wallace, and remember that the switch is in your hand, not theirs. This is Mysteria. Say no.